Finance ministers from across the country have just wrapped their meeting today with Federal Finance Minister Bill Morneau. The issue that dominated those talks, the fiscal stabilization program. It's not as boring as it sounds, I promise. It's basically a way for struggling economies to get more money from the federal government. Alberta is leading the calls for that program to become more generous. Travis Toews is Alberta's finance minister. He joins me now. Hi, Minister Toews. Great to see you.
It's good to be here.
Thanks very much for making some time to stop by. I wanted to start off, of course, with the fiscal stabilization program ask from your government as well as other provincial governments. The federal minister said he's open to it and that some sort of discussions will happen in the new year. Can you be specific about what the ask is?
Sure, happy to. Well, the fiscal stabilization program is a program that's designed to provide some relief to provinces when they've experienced very significant downturns in revenue. And in Alberta's case, in 2015, we experienced a $7 billion decrease in revenues due to the crash in energy prices, largely. And unfortunately, there are caps in place in that program which really minimized the positive impact the program had for Alberta. The caps are $60 per capita. They've been in place since the 80s. And so our first priority, our first ask was to lift the caps from the program.
Completely.
Completely, and let the program function without them. And Saskatchewan and Newfoundland also had a couple of requests which we've supported, and those requests are related to the thresholds. In other words, at which point the program begins to kick in. So in one instance, the request was made to reduce the threshold on resource revenues from 50% reduction to 40%. And in non-resource revenues, the threshold recommendation is to move from 5% to 3%. So we're supportive of those recommendations.
Is it also about making it retroactive? That's something the Premier had signaled previously.
That's right. So our recommendations are the three that I just explained, and then basically applying the changes retroactively to 2015. And so for Alberta, that's very important. The fiscal stabilization program is a program that typically does not kick in very often. For us, 2015, 2016 were years that we really needed the relief. And
in dollar terms, how much more money? Is that to the $2.4 billion that we've heard from your government in the past?
It is. So in terms of lifting of the caps, the measure that we've put forward, it would result in a $2.4 billion return for Alberta. The additional requests or changes that have been put forward would actually increase that.
So it's 2.4 plus.
It's 2.4 plus. But I want to put that in some context here. Even during the last 5 years, when Alberta's economy's been in tough, when our energy industry has been experiencing challenges, we've still, as a province, have been making a net fiscal contribution to the nation of over $20 billion a year. So over the 5 years of retroactivity that we're requesting the rebate for, Alberta contributed approximately $100 billion to Confederation. So the $2.4 billion ask is a mere 2.5%.
I mean, there are reasons for that as well, right? The formula by which all of this gets calculated, or equalization, is about a province's capacity to raise revenue, despite what is definitely, and no one wants to take away from really, really tough economic times, there's still a high median income in Alberta.
Well, that's true, and our fiscal transfers are based on our fiscal capacity, which is significant in Alberta. However, in spite of that significant fiscal capacity, when due to economic issues, we experienced a $7 billion reduction in revenue. That hits the province hard. And that's the purpose of the fiscal stabilization, to provide some relief for those kinds of events. With the cap, it simply was unable to provide that relief. Again, with our recommendations and retroactivity, that program will function as it should.
I take your point completely, and in no way would I want to take away from the idea of, like I said, helping people out who are suffering in Alberta and in Saskatchewan and other provinces. But why should the federal government, when you pick up the slack, when your government has made, and the previous one, to be fair, the NDP government has made a distinct decision not to look at the revenue side of things and not to introduce a sales tax which economists estimate could bring in $5 billion a year to your revenue stream. You've made that set of decisions, and that's fine. That's your government's prerogative. But as a result, why is it incumbent on the federal government to pick up the slack?
Well, again, listen, relative to our total fiscal contribution, during those 5 years of $100 billion. This fiscal stabilization program, which is meant to provide some relief in terms of big revenue shocks. We believe that we're very justified in requesting what's really a very minimal rebate from a percentage standpoint. Now,
it's a lot of money, though. That's the only reason I say they're already running a deficit. Likely this would, or perhaps this could add to the deficit, which means that's more debt for other taxpayers, throughout the country to have to pay throughout the years.
Sure. We've in Alberta, we've been implementing policies that will actually increase our fiscal capacity over time. We're confident that over time that will take place. We're also dealing with
by cutting
our fiscal situation, which is challenging, and that is in terms of our spending trajectory that we've inherited from the previous government. So
actually, that trajectory was established well before the NDP took office.
Sure, it was. The NDP
by previous Conservative government.
Sure, the NDP continued it on at a time when revenues were flat, but our spending problem has preceded the previous government for sure. At any rate, it's incumbent on us to deal with our spending problem and ensure that our program spending is in line with other provinces. Now, in terms of increasing fiscal capacity, we're doing that by creating the most competitive business environment. And we're
through cutting
confident
corporate taxes?
Through reducing corporate taxes, through modernizing our regulatory environment, adopting the accelerated capital cost allowance provisions, and other measures that we believe in time will certainly expand our fiscal capacity. Nonetheless, the $7 billion shock to our revenues back in 2015 and the following decrease in 2016 really left the province challenged to deliver the programs that Albertans expect. And again, we believe that a retroactive payment on fiscal stabilization would be very much in order.
I just have a few seconds left. Will that money, if you were to receive it, go towards program spending or go towards paying down the deficit?
We would make those decisions at the time that we received it. We would make sure that
Should that be part of the consideration for the federal government, though?
Well, we would absolutely expect those funds with no strings attached. When we make fiscal contributions to the federal government and equalization payments go out, there are no strings attached with the spending of those funds.
All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Minister Taves.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
To have you here.
All right.
Well, we've certainly heard the request from the provinces, and having just received the suggested approach in the last couple of hours, I don't have a response, and I don't think anyone would argue that Alberta and Saskatchewan and Newfoundland and Labrador aren't going through difficult financial times. So I think we need to look at it in that context. We plan on doing that, but we've got no conclusions until we do the analysis.
Time will tell. I can't overemphasize the fact that timing's important here. We hope, trust that the federal government will move quickly on that request.
I get a sense from the federal minister that they're open to our proposal. They're going to review it, and I'm absolutely certain we'll see a refined program.
The country's finance ministers met with their federal counterpart, Bill Morneau, today, and no one really seems to be leaving angry. Is that a good sign for the provinces asking for billions in retroactive stabilization money, or is it the calm before a stormy First Ministers meeting in the new year? Time for the Power Panel to answer that question. In Calgary, executive producer of CBC News, Kathleen Petty. Tiffany Gooch, political commentator and columnist, joins us from Toronto. And next to me here in studio, Earnscliffe Strategy Group's Jeff Norquay and political commentator and former NDP MP Françoise Boivin. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hi.
Nice to see you. Kathleen, I'll start with you. We had Minister Taves on, the minister from Alberta, and Minister Phillips from Ontario. All seemed pretty happy with the way things went today. Do you think that that feeling sticks?
I don't know. I am trying to imagine how much money the federal government, as content as they seem to be handing money over and spending money based on the fiscal update. Still, Alberta at $2.4 billion. I don't know what the price is retroactively for this fiscal stabilization fund for Newfoundland and Labrador and Saskatchewan. So I don't know what the total bill will be. It's very obvious, listening to Travis Taves, both in the news conference and his interview with you, that retroactivity is key here. And I would point out that just in the last handful of days, there have been three really not very good polls for both Jason Kenney and the UCP. So they very much need a win here. And it seems to me given all the money already being expended by this federal government, there's going to be a lot more going out the door if those wishes are fulfilled.
Tiffany, how likely do you think it is that the federal government complies with the ask? Because it's not just retroactive and removing the cap. It's almost also a change in the formula as far as, and I think this proposal came outside of Alberta, I think the minister was saying, but changing the formula so that it's triggered earlier too, when revenues are decreased, at a different level. How likely do you think the feds are to bite in the new year?
I think there's quite a bit for their teams to review in terms of what the package looks like. I think there are a couple of key considerations. There's a big difference between removing a cap and changing a cap, and I think that might need to be a differentiation for people to understand as well. And then from there as well, the retroactive conversations and how much money is being asked for might deem a little bit of an interest into whether there needs to be some level of stipulations to the funds, as much as these premiers and ministers are hoping that it doesn't. I think seeing these two governments servicing the same people, of course, the federal government came out with their mandate letters on Friday of last week, and it's very clear that finding a new way forward on how these things are funded is a core item that is within Morneau's mandate. But as well, there were a lot of really specific areas in health funding and health outcomes that were named, and so I think that the premiers across the board, as they've come together with this uniform idea, will need to have a lot more of a clear narrative about how they want to spend the money and how to make sure that it's going to the services that the feds will want to see it go to, if and as they make their considerations to the package.
Jeff, basically the question that I'm hoping to get answered, that I know we're all just reading into the tea leaves, is how likely is Bill Morneau and the Prime Minister, rather, to hand over $2.4 billion, no strings attached, to Alberta?
Very unlikely. I think the problem and the sticking point here is retroactivity. There are things that the feds can do quite easily to help by adjusting the per capita and perhaps adjusting the point of engagement for the Fiscal Stability Act. But retroactivity is a really, really hard bridge to cross for any Department of Finance. Especially at the federal level. Just to make the point, yesterday, Mr. Morneau revealed that he's blown through the deficit number for this year by $5, $6, $7 billion. It's going to be going up a couple of billion more next year.
Unsurprising given the promises they made in the campaign.
Exactly, $45, $50 billion. Something's going to have to give here. He's in a very, very tight box financially. So to bring it back to fiscal stabilization, I think they're going to get part of a loaf, but not the full one.
I guess, I take the point that there are obvious fiscal considerations
Sure.
with this type of a program, Françoise. But on a political level, how much of an olive branch do they need to extend to Alberta? And if it's not the full $2.4 billion, what do you anticipate the political reaction is in return?
1.9. No.
Okay, thank you for the exact number. I've been looking for that all day, yeah.
I knew you would. I'm a bit like Jeff on that issue. It's not as easy, especially on retroactivity, because you know that all the other provinces who are very solidaire right now, if they find that some new criteria that could have helped them maybe 3, 4, 5 years back when the feds had already cut their transfers and so on, it's opening such a can of worms. So they will have to be very imaginative on the federal side. I think that's why Minister Morneau, when he says, as a politician, when they form committees and they study things, usually it's to gain a bit of time because they are very aware of what is the problem right now. So to put that in the hands of so-called expert to come back, it's basically to get some time.
Yep.
And if I could just jump in just quickly, let's not forget the readout from the Prime Minister last week when he met with Jason Kenney. He very specifically said in his readout, he talked about the future of the program. Yep. And those words don't get put in communiques by accident.
Exactly.
It's just to sort of speak to what Jeff is saying. I think the retroactivity is going to be the real sticking point here. And again, I'll just emphasize, we don't know what the price tag for that is in Saskatchewan or Newfoundland and Labrador either.
But at the same time, based on what Kathleen was saying and the polls concerning Jason Kenney, the Prime Minister, if he wants to settle this once and for all and send the whole Federation in a positive path, has to find an out for Jason Kenney. As strange as it looks, even though they're not of the same political orientation, if he doesn't give the retroactivity, he has to give him something that Kenney can go back to Albertans and say, I got you this, which is not retroactivity, but is good. So I think that's the time they're getting right now to try to find the right...
It'll take a little while.
Yeah, okay. Exactly.
Really quick, Jeff, and I got to take a break.
Okay, I think there are other things the feds can do. Flexibility on Bill C-69, on Bill C-48. The regulations are coming. The Western provinces have begged and pleaded to be consulted and listened to on those regulations. So that's another part of the package.
And they have signaled an openness to that,
That's right.
although we don't know what the details of that
Exactly.
are. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.